Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is going to be as comprehensive as it can be, a video on the left side Truststone sets and the passives and how you want to think about them, how I value them, what they actually mean practically and statistically. This is going to be a little more of like a podcast style video with me talking at you rather than actually showing a full presentation. So hopefully that's okay. But I know the information here I get tons of questions on. I think it's incredibly important to understand as you try to increase how competitive you are in the game. And so I'm going to talk first about the set bonuses, when they're best and why, some about the stats, what I think is valuable, what's not, what characters thrive with certain sets, which ones don't, and then go through the Truststone passives in general, because I hear a lot of people like certain passives, but I'm telling you, I think you're thinking about some of them incorrectly. So starting on the set bonuses here, top to bottom, HP set is everyone's universal favorite, and for good reason. I think this is one of the safest stones you can make. It should be one of the first sets you make. So when you have 3 of them equipped, you get 5% HP and elemental resist 5%. Now, one of the things that most people forget about is that each one of these sets has their own type of main stat. That's the term. I'm using air quotations, but that's what it's called. And that main stat caters to the set itself. So the main stat of an HP stone is that it'll get 100 extra HP. So times 3 stones, the HP set will also give you 300 HP. For something like defense and spirit, you get 4 of extra of each. So times 3, you get 12 defense or 12 spirit. These main stats are extremely critical to not forget about. Now, in addition to the main stats of the stones, you also have what they call substats that all the set bonuses get no matter what. So this is not unique to HP or defense or crit avoid or luck. All of them get these 3. So on an eye stone, you have HP, TP, and crit evade, and these are the ones that you can re-roll on to increase. On the J stone, you get HP, TP, and evade. So all 3 of these stones have some form of HP. And on the last one here, the P stone, you get HP, TP, and luck. So as we think about the HP stone, a lot of people see the HP 5%. Number one, think it's valuable. It is not as valuable as you might think though across different characters. And just to show you exactly what I mean, this list that we're seeing here is top to bottom sorted, the characters with their base HP, and then this is what 5% of their HP actually looks like. So when you're talking about the top tier like tanks of the game, 5% of their base HP is, yeah, just a little bit north of 200, but if you're really looking up and down this list, most of these characters, even as you start to go lower, the HP is still relatively close. The difference between 120 HP and Engelbert's 238 is not materially impacting. Sure, like that's literally the best in the game. Most characters, that 5% HP, it's pretty much the same for most characters, give or take like 20 or 30 HP. That's not winning or losing you any battles though. So the 5% HP is certainly nice. Where it really gets an extra value, though, is in the main stat that you get an extra 300 HP when you're equipping all 3. Now, one of the most critically misunderstood parts of Truststones is how the stats stack with the rest of your equipment, which is why it's very situational to what else you have equipped. Now, the way it essentially works is, and I can share this link in case people don't have it, but WOT Info has this great breakdown upon what percentage of the stats you retain as you equip more of them. So looking something at like HP, for that equipment with the highest HP stat, you'll keep 100% of the HP, but for the second highest HP, you'll only get 50%. So if your TMR has the second highest HP compared to the armor you might be equipping, that 300 HP that you're getting extra from the set bonus is going to get cut in half. So while it sounds really great, it's maybe also not as impactful as you might think. The 5% also may not be as impactful as you might think. The most impressive thing about this is the elemental resist of 5%, where that decreases all types of elemental-based attacks coming in by 5%. It's a impenetrable type of resistance, which is why it's so strong. And understanding which types are penetrable and impenetrable is a big part of understanding which ones get the most value. And we'll talk about that more once we get to the passive section. Now, the TP set, this is one of the few sets that I almost never see being the best. The acquired AP of 25% is actually very good. It's great that it stacks with a variety of other sources of acquired AP. But you are trading off some survivability here compared to the other stones of what they give you just for some acquired AP. The TP 10% is nice for only a very select few of characters that are very hard supports that really only cast TP skills. I know Resnick and Velos are like 2 of those characters where the AI is just always spamming support abilities if possible. So when you talk about like second Guild War attacks or even like third defense, if that's something you're seeing, they'll typically just straight up run out of TP by them. So being able to give them extra TP is helpful, but I still, at the end of the day, have not seen a case where that has been a better choice than the HP set or even the defense or spirit set because of what they do for healing power, because we're talking about healers, right? So the TP set, very niche, probably the one I see the least upside here. Now we talk about the defense and spirit sets. I think this is one of the more misunderstood ones in the game. The whole thing with the defense and spirit stones isn't necessarily around the set bonus, but it revolves around the main stats here of getting the 12 defense and the 12 spirit. And it's critically important on these two sets that the TMR that you're equipping has either the highest defense or the highest spirit of what you're equipping if you're putting one of these sets on, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So just for an example here, this Moshri starts off with 2 defense. I have currently on the Black Rose Landed TMR equipped a defense set bonus. So technically right now you can see this 12 defense here is coming from the Truststones. If I equip this, she's going to actually get the 12 plus another 3 from the set bonus, so she's going to increase to the 17 defense. Now what ends up happening is if you're going to equip another piece of equipment here that has a higher defense stat, for instance, defense bracer plus 5 has defense of 16. What that means is how much defense you retain on that second highest stat is only 20%. So that 12 defense we just saw, you're only going to get 20% of the 12 defense. It might as well be nothing. So when I go ahead and equip this, yes, technically my defense will increase from 17 to 23, but that's almost entirely because of this piece of equipment. And screw it, we'll do the calc. It takes 20% of either the 15 defense, we'll go high, the 15 defense. You're only getting 3 defense off of that current defense set. So basically worthless, which is why you need to be careful when you're equipping that. I often recommend it on characters that end up putting cloth TMRs here, where if you do equip a cloth TMR or an armor, they naturally have much higher defense and spirit stats. So the defense, for instance, of the orange clothing will stack with the defense of the set bonus and the Truststone stats. So you want to lean into that. Now, the other time it's also very good, for instance, I put the defense bracer there, is if I instead put something that's more spirit oriented. So if I put the Galmia cloak on her, she's going to take that 18 spirit and she's going to retain all of the defense that she currently has from the defense Truststone set. So you do still get value in sort of giving her both spirit and defense. It's a way to hedge both of those weaknesses. But the other big part of it is the healing power 10, where obviously as you talk about supports and tanks, characters that tend to get healed the most or have some kind of self-healing or heal other characters, it amplifies how much healing you do by 10%. And for characters that have self-heal, it's technically 20% because you're the healer and the healee. So the whole point of the defense and spirit sets is to really hedge against certain weaknesses if you don't have spirit or defense already in your equipment, and it's to make sure that you get more healing via internal, external sources. That's really the trade-off. And when you talk about like, well, is it better than the HP set? It's situational. So for instance, this elemental resistance will reduce incoming damage by 5% for element attacks, while defense of 15 will reduce incoming physical attacks by 15%. So you're technically reducing the damage more by the defense set, but that's where the trade-off is, because elemental resist applies to both physical and magic, defense only applies to physical. So that's where the trade-off happens. And although I'm saying you will reduce the damage by 15%, you also have to consider that there's things like defense penetration. So if you assume someone has 40 defense penetration, well, they're not really going to mitigate the whole 15. They're only going to mitigate 9% of it instead of the 15%. But still, 9% is higher than the HP of 5%. But again, you're now leaving yourself open to extra damage from magic attacks. So that's why I always say like matchup specific. If you're going against a lightning comp of, Esther, Cloud, and Charlotte, well, obviously you don't have to worry about spirit at all. In which case the defense set probably will make you take less damage than the HP set will, and vice versa for magic. Now we talk about the next couple here. Luck. This is obviously meant more for evade units, but also very much so for the accuracy of units. I see so many people that are saying, I still have trouble with hitting evade, and they're constantly forgetting that you have to increase your luck on the left side here to do so. It's vitally important as part of the accuracy calculation. And I did a video forever ago on exactly how much accuracy it is for most characters, and it tends to be about 10 to 11% extra more accuracy. And for evasion, it's the same thing. It's about 10 or 11% more evasion. And on that note of increasing your luck via this set bonus, it's also really important, if that's important to you, to increase your luck, to not forget to temper the luck to its maximum on your P Truststone. Remember, there's substats here, and all of these 3 stones have HP and TP, but they each have a unique third stat. So your I stat has crit evade, your J stat has regular evade, and your P stat has luck. So if you're trying to increase your accuracy, you really want to try to make sure you're close to that 19 luck. And if you're an evade unit, you want to make sure that you're both not only close to that 19 luck, but you also want to make sure on your Jay's set that you're close to that 8% evade. Now we look at the rest of the set bonuses here, you get the actual evade set itself. And this one technically does have more evasion than the luck. So this you get the evade rate of 15. And as I just said, the luck set bonus gives you like 10 to 12 evasion. So this, at first glance, might only give you 3% more evasion than the luck. But again, you have to also recall the main stats here. You also get evade of 2 per each stone. So times 3 stones is an extra 6% evade. So it's the 15% evade plus the 6% evade. So you get 21% evade on that set bonus, which is most definitely higher than the 10 to 12 you get on the luck. But the trade-off is the luck also gives you accuracy. So you have to pick which means more to you, pure evasion, or do you want to get a little accurate as well? So the evade set certainly is viable for increasing your evasion by close to double digits. And for this set bonus, the same thing is true that I was just talking about the substats. You still want to max your evade stat and your luck stat if possible to help that evade unit. But this is also, again, one of those instances you want to make sure that the TMR you're equipping has the highest evasion rate. If you were, for instance, going to be putting on something like the winter clothes or the winter coat, this has an evade stat on it. So if this is your highest evade stat on your equipment, then the TMR is going to get cut down to 30% of its total value. So that nice 21% won't be a full 21%. It'll only be 7%. So you have to really make sure that the TMR that you're putting this evasion set on does have an innately high evasion stat already on it. I know like a good example, this is the Lara backpack here where you start off with 12 evasion on it. Well, if you add the evade set to it, that 12 is going to go up to 33% evasion. I think that's why most people tend to stay away from some of these bottom ones here, and the same thing for the defense and spirit is because, again, they're not as universal as the HP. You have to do a little more with the rest of the equips that you have. And when you talk about Truststones, which obviously are very resource intensive, to get the pink ones and to max them and whatnot, it's very expensive to grind and to farm and whatnot. So it's just safer to go with the easier one. But if you're talking about optimization and really trying to min-max and climb the competitive ladder, it's very important to be very much aware of these things. And the final one here, the crit evade, is probably the most slept on stat here. It's one that I've been doing an extensive amount of mathematical research on recently to try to figure out if there's any breakpoints for when this is the best to mitigate incoming damage as compared to, let's say, the HP, defense, or spirit set. And there generally is. I'm going to talk very briefly about this from like a very high math level, so try to stay with me, but hopefully this will make sense, at least learn something new. So again, the way that crit hit works in this game is that each character has an innate crit rate based upon their dexterity stat, and then whatever you get for critical rate buffs. But then there's a second part of the equation, which is the crit avoid, and that is based off your luck stat, and then whatever crit avoid you also add. So one minus the other gives you the net crit hit rate. And so the whole concept of the crit evasion stone, it gives you 25, and the main stat is 4, so you get 12 on 3 stones, meaning total of 37 crit evasion. And this is where, again, it's super matchup specific. If you have a character that has an innately high crit avoid rate, I'm gonna take an example like Snow for a second here. A brand new tank. He's got a crit avoid rate of 56%. And let's say he's going against, who's a meta character? We'll go Joker here. Joker's got a crit hit rate of 74. 74 minus 56. So Joker's got an 18% crit rate at the moment. Now, again, these are only base stats and passives and whatnot. Once you put on equipment, this rate's going to change a little bit. But I'm just going to throw out a number for the sake of just example. Let's say the crit hit rate ends up being 40 of Joker critically hitting Snow. Well, this crit evasion is 37 total crit avoid, which means you're going to take out that 37 from the 40. So the chance that Joker will critically hit Snow is only 3%, basically nothing. And if you wanted to figure out, well, how do I know if that's more or less damage in the HP set? There is kind of a mathematical formula to think about here and how you can figure it out. So let's take an example here of Joker. And let's say he's going to do, I'll pick an easy attack here, Aegon, 200% modifier. So the modifier is 200% innately. Let's say Joker also has Dark Attack up of 50. I'm just throwing a number out there. Let's say he's also got Man Killer 25. Again, I'm just throwing a number out there. So right now the total modifier is 275. Now when you critically hit someone, the crit hit itself is an extra 25 modifier plus any kind of crit damage up. So let's assume Joker has the Truststone passive, crit damage up 10. This is obviously not something that you see equipped very often, but I know Fleeting Blossom Banquet is a dark card that has crit damage 25 on it. So let's just assume, again, sake of example, that they also have that. So the total extra crit damage he's going to do is an extra 60 modifier. So now you take your regular modifier of the attack, and if he's critically hitting Snow, he would technically have a modifier of 335. Well, the way you can tell whether or not Snow would take more or less damage by avoiding a critical hit, if you consider that elemental resist decreases incoming damage by 5%, well, the threshold here is how much is the percentage gain here of the crit hit modifier compared to the regular modifier. And if we're comparing how much it increases by 22%. So if Joker is going to crit hit Snow, it's going to be increased outgoing damage of 22%, and Snow's only going to resist an extra 5% because of the set bonus. So in this instance, not taking the critical hit and just taking the regular damage amount would do less damage to Snow by a decent margin. But that's all the time and math I'm going to spend on that. As you can see, it's obviously extremely matchup dependent, extremely equipment specific. And so it's one of the reasons why I don't often recommend it. It just takes too much thinking and math to actually see if it's valuable in a wide array of situations. But technically speaking, it actually is super valuable, and specifically for certain elements and characters. And I say this against lightning elements in particular, where if you look at a lot of the lightning units, there are many characters nowadays who have abilities that have extra effects if they critically hit. And I know 3 of them that come off the top of the head. Cloud has that buff where if you're critically hitting someone, you will restore AP of 10. Well, if you can deny them the critical hit, you are now denying them that extra AP, which is going to nerf their potential offensive output as the battle goes on. I know Esther has a couple here where upon critical hit, increases her debuff resistance by 30%. There's another one here that restores HP of 20% when it's a critical hit. I know Lightning technically has one here where Scourge has the slow effect if it's a critical hit. So there's a lot of upside intangibles to not being critically hit other than just damage that you need to consider. But again, whether or not that's important to do, I'm going to say no. It's probably not all that important for the average player, but it is important to be aware of. But that's it for the set bonuses overall. Obviously, you can see there's time and place that's really specific upon the matchup and what you already have equipped to make sure you're getting the most out of the TMRs here. Now, as we transition into the passives and say, well, which passives are the best and why, there's a couple general rules to think about here and how you want to segregate them. Now, number one, there's certain passives which I consider universal, like great in all situations no matter what. And for those, you want to tend to group those on the same Truststone itself so that you can apply it to any character, anytime, across any meta, across any situation. And to me, there's really only 2 of them, or 3 of them even. It's HP 10%, Luck 10%, and Crit Evade 15. Those are like the universal ones in my opinion that are good on all characters and all times. Now again, you can only put 2 on one Truststone. You can't do all 3. Me personally, I tend to put HP... I'm sorry, my light just went out here. I tend to put HP and Luck on the same Truststone, but I think it's also safe to start putting Luck and Crit Evade on another Truststone because as we're seeing with some of these +6 equipments, I'm going to use the Platinum Robe here as an example. Well, one of the +6 benefits is HP of 15%. Well, what that means is you can't stack that. It's a box. We call this box stat because it's in the box at the bottom of Void of Calc. This does not stack with your HP 10% passive, which means the 10% Truststone passive is useless if you're wearing the Platinum Robe. So I think it's also important to, have a couple runes that have the Luck and the Crit Evade on, but no HP for those instances that you're equipping the Platinum Robe. Now, as we go through the rest of these, I think the next best one to have ready at all times is the element resistances of 7%. And this is when you hear me say matchup specific, this is exactly what I mean. If you know that we're in a dark meta, it's exceptionally helpful to have dark resistance 7% ready to go because that's another impenetrable resistance. They can't bypass that 7% dark resistance on when they're attacking you. Now, what's it good to pair with? There's a couple ways you can go with this. Number one, you could lump together a couple meta resistances on one stone. So for instance, let's say you're in Guild Wars and you see a couple different metas where you are. Let's say you see dark and light. Well, maybe on that one trust stone, you put dark resistance 7 and light resistance 7. I don't think there's anything wrong with that because you're basically hedging which one you're going to potentially see. There are other times where, let's say you know for a fact that you're going to be attacking a dark team. Well, dark resistance is 7%, but you also know that Dark Leela and Joker also have defense breaks in their kit. I have a stone myself where I have dark resistance 7%, but I'm skipping ahead here, but I also have defense debuff resistance to 25% as well, knowing that defense breaks are very prevalent with the dark elements. And so you can kind of play with that as your second option on the stone. So either you can put together multiple resistances on the same stone, or you can pair it with something that you know they have a lot of. Now the third one here, and my overall least favorite, is the weapon type resistances, slash, strike, pierce, missile, magic. And there's only a couple niche situations where I think these are the best. And I'll tell you exactly why. I honestly think they're best when you're putting them on characters that are negative in their resistance. So for instance, we'll take a brand new character here. We'll look at someone like Snow, who's a great example of this. Snow has negative 5% magic resistance. To me, he's a great candidate to put 7% resistance on your Trust Stone, to put him at 2% positive. And the reason why you want to do that is so that you don't have to put on a piece of equipment that has magic resistance on it. And if you think of the cloth types that have magic resistance on it, it's like what, like the smart cloak, and like there's only a couple others, but you don't want to have to equip the smart cloak just to get some magic resistance on your equipment. This is like a nice easy free way to make it go from negative to positive. Where I think these are bad is when you have characters that already have extremely high resistances and you're not increasing it by that much. And the reason for that is there's a lot of a weapon type penetration. So for instance, let's say you have a tank that has, 50% slash resistance, and let's say you have another slash resistance of 7%. So now they have a total of 57% resistance. And you're like, that's cool, I just increased that. But again, slash type resistance penetration is so prevalent across all the popular damage type dealers. At minimum, many of them have 40%. A lot of them have vision cards that increase it. There's Truststone passives that increase it. So let's assume someone has 50% slash resistance penetration. Well, that means they ignore half of this. So it's essentially 28% slash resistance is what your character has when they're getting attacked. Well, if you didn't put on that 7% and you only had that 50%, well, half of that is 25%. So that whole Truststone passive isn't giving you 7% slash resistance. It's only giving you 3% slash resistance because it's being penetrated by someone with 50%. And many characters go higher than that. The dark meta goes higher than 50% slash resistance penetration. The lightning element can go higher than that. So I don't think these are nearly as valuable, at least for the popular types. Now, maybe for the unpopular types, like pierce resistance, sure. There's not as much pierce resistance in the game, so you don't have to worry about the penetration as much. So its value isn't nearly as diminished as something like the slash, missile, and magic, which are the most prevalent types that have penetration in the game. So I don't think those three are nearly as important. And the same thing for strike resistance. I don't think strike damage is so impactful that you have to roll and spend all the resources to max the strike resistance. So overall, I tend to like these a lot less. Now for the evasion rate of 7, I don't think this is nearly impactful for anything. I don't have a single character where I think this is good on. It's not good enough, in my opinion, to do anything with. So I would always pass on that. And then the rest of this status element, don't sleep on these. These are also very important. But again, matchup specific. And I tend to group them together on elements that I know have very impactful status effects together. So a great example, number one, would be if I know I'm going against a wind meta. Well, I know Sadali has Charm on the limit break. He's got Confusion as another ability. And I also know More the Merrier has Silence on her limit break. And so if I know I'm going against a wind comp, I'll very likely make a Trust Stone that has Charm resistance on it and has Confusion resistance on it, or has Silence and Confusion. Putting them together, and that one stone I'll only be equipping when I know that I'm likely to see a lot of wind. And there's a lot of elements that have that. Another great example is the Dark Cast, where Fina has Stop and Dark Leela has Blind on the limit break. I have a Trust Stone that has both Stop and Blind resistance on it. And for something like Limited Guild War, I know Renell also has a blind effect, so that also helps when you have those situations. So grouping together the status effects are also really important for, again, who you're going up against. And most commonly, I like them most on the tanks, because obviously the tanks take the brunt of the damage. Now, as we keep moving down the list here on the left side, you start getting into the debuffs. And again, this is really dependent upon who you're seeing as your matchup. Now, overall, I don't think attack and magic debuff resistance is super widespread because the breaks scale off your base stats, right? Well, not all characters have amazingly high attack or amazingly high magic. Now, the ones that do, which is why I focus on base stats here, they actually are some of the best candidates to get this. And so I just did my Lightning review, and she has an amazingly high base 426. So if you go against someone that has a that has an attack break of 50%, well, she's going to lose 213 attack stat. Like, that's rather material in my opinion. But again, far more niche in terms of who you apply it on and how many characters have attack and magic debuffs. And quite honestly, I don't think these two stats turn the tides of battle nearly as impactful as some of the other ones. Now, agility debuff resistance is actually one of the more valuable ones, but again, really dependent upon who you're seeing. If you think of the Elena limit break, it's agility down. If you think of Joom, her main AoE 100% hit chance is also agility down. People that are popularly equipping the Thornlit accessory, which is agility down, this is really great because there are some characters that have very high base agility, and this actually might materially affect the turn order of things. But again, matchup specific. And then finally, you get into defense and spirit debuff resistance. Defense debuff resistance is very popular on a lot of characters nowadays, so this one's by far my favorite. The spirit debuff resistance, less so. Only coming to mind who has spirit debuff, it's really like Queen Mashri, Golbez, I think maybe Renan has it, like, but not characters you always see as often, so this is still good, but not nearly as prevalent. We're not really in a Magic meta that utilizes that heavily, so I wouldn't worry too much about that at the time of this video. But then finally, the debuff resistant for attack types and element debuff resistances. So this first one's like slash res down, missile res down. This next one, things like wind res down, dark res down. These are, in my opinion, great mostly on tanks, but really great on anybody. But it's, again, really matchup specific for characters that use these the most. And they do stack with a nice variety of external things sometimes. But the only downside with these two, again, is it's only 25% chance reduction in actually getting that imperil. So the odds are not stacked in your favor. So although they're valuable to some degree, they're also not that valuable. Then if you consider going against lightning, let's say all three characters have a lightning imperil, well, if you only have a 1 in 4 chance of stopping it, if you're getting hit 3 times, one of them is going to apply it to you. So again, at the end of the day, the impact really not that strong, so probably on the lower priority of things. But if you have no other passives that you need, it's not the worst one to invest in. But that's the way you want to think about the Truststones in a nutshell. So hopefully when you see me give these videos and I recommend and it sounds repetitive, it's because it often is, and it really is very matchup specific. HP, again, being the most generally applicable one without doing a lot of math to get value on, so I tend to recommend it because it's more accessible to you, the audience. Defense and spirit I recommend, but again, you kind of have to know exactly when those are best and how to fit them into your party. Luck is straightforward enough, and again, the crit evade one is really dependent upon doing the math yourself, so a lot harder to get the value out of, but you do get a lot of value when you do it properly. And then when it comes to the passives, again, really just making sure you group together like passives in terms of universal ones versus matchup specific ones. So do your best to group together the HP, the luck, and the crit evade. And the rest of them is really just meta dependent. And I unfortunately can't answer that for you guys because where you are on the Guild War ladder is very different in terms of what you might see. There are certain parts of the ladder where you only see certain types. And if I'm not seeing that where you are, well, I obviously can't give you a definitive recommendation. I need you to decide that for yourself, which is why I'm making this video. I want to give you guys the tools to be able to answer that question on your own upon which of the passives is best to roll for and when to equip where and why. But that's it for now. I'll be doing a video on the right side as well. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will talk to you all soon.